Let's go. Vision of the anointed. Self-congratulation basis of society policy. The regions of woke. Okay, this one.
The vision of the anointed. Now that's an interesting title. Who are the anointed?
Who are
They're
they?
the elite in the media, in politics. All of those who think that third parties ought to be making people's decisions for them. The subtitle is Self-Congratulation as a Basis for Social Policy. In other words, people who think that everything that's wrong with the country is due to the fact that other people are just not as smart as they are. And if only they could, or people like them could take over and make our decisions, we'd be so much better off.
But in early
right,
America,
good point.
didn't this sort of educated class make
Good
the
point.
decisions for everybody?
As far as governmental decisions,
Yeah.
but the government itself didn't make the decisions for everyone. Now, you can't decide where your kid's going to school. You can't decide whether or not they can move a halfway house for drug users next door to you or whatnot.
It's out of your control. The government decides
That's
that
right.
stuff.
I mean, I know a lot of people are fighting for school choices. Is that a state by state thing or a federal government thing? Let me know in the comment section below.
The government decides too many things. They decide also how your children are to be raised. You may have an idea about at what age children should be introduced to sex, and in what manner, with what kind of moral.
Oh, this is
commitment.
just
mean
back
as a
then.
parent, you
Wow.
have
As a parent, yes.
It's almost 30 years ago.
The schools
Wow.
have taken that over. By the time you even think about it, they've already had years, of showing.
They're passing out condoms to these kids
Passing
even
out
before
condoms is not
Wow.
even a half of it. They're showing motion pictures of naked couples engaging in sex, both homosexual
What?
and heterosexual, in the
Hold on. This is 1995. This is 1995.
7th grade.
Follow up.
And if you complain about it, that's considered to be censorship.
You can't pull your kid out of school and say they don't have to put up with this stuff. I guess you could,
No.
but you'd be.
Well, if you have a private school to put them in, but you have compulsory attendance laws, and if you don't have the money for private schools, then you're stuck.
Where did this country get off the track and decide that the federal government should make most of our decisions?
Well, it started to some extent in the New Deal, but I think the 1960s is sort of the golden age, if you want to put it that way, of this whole mindset.
civil,
and that's what the book's
civil
about. It's
right
about
era.
a mindset. It's not about a series of policies, but of showing how in policy after policy, those who think a certain way will try to take over other people's
Damn,
decisions.
I like these
How do you
videos.
characterize the liberal philosophy today from the conservative philosophy?
Oh, that's a tough one. I guess the main thing about the liberals, again, is that they think a program will do it. If there's something that they don't
I
like
see.
in the society, you have set up a program and that will solve the problem. I think one of the things one of the words they use a lot is solutions. And I argue here and elsewhere that there are no solutions. There are just trade-offs. So, for example, when Ralph Nader launched his attack against the Corvair many years ago, he said it's an unsafe car and it has these safety problems and those safety problems. And in some respects, he was correct, not all. But the fact is, there were other things that a Corvair would do that made it safer than other cars. And on net balance, it was as safe as the rest of them.
Are you saying there are no solutions
Damn,
to a problem?
he's very smart. He's very smart. Let me just get myself together here. Okay. So there's no such thing as solution. There's only trade-off. Okay, that's what he's saying. Now we're talking about the federal government. Okay, we're not talking about private entities. He did mention about the private entity having problems with, like an auto car company was having problems, and I don't know how to fix it. The train of thought just lost him a little bit. But let's just go back to the point that he mentioned. It is true. A lot of these left side of the equation, they want just institute programs instead of being proactive into the solution with trade-off, right? That is very interesting. And the fact that this is a 1995 conversation and these two fellows are just sitting down and just question all these things, and they were talking about, all these things that they're going to present that was worrisome still today, I guess. It is a concern. The fact that this was 1995, I think the conservative movement failed to just stop this, which was obvious.
As Americans?
There are no solutions to anybody's problems. There are trade-offs. Safety is a classic example.
You said it again?
every year, so many hundreds of thousands of people are vaccinated against measles, smallpox, those kinds of things. Now, this saves several hundred lives, it's estimated. It also causes brain damage to about 30 kids a year.
Wow.
Now, there are no solutions in that. There are just trade-offs.
What about crime? Take crime as an issue. Can we solve the crime issue
That's a hard
or
one,
fundamentally solve it so it's reduced?
Well, then that's a trade-off. You don't solve it. There will always be crime. There always has been. But you want to keep it down to some level. It's not this astronomical thing we have today. For example, the liberals right now are saying, crime has eased off in New York, and that's true. There were 6 times as much crime in New York a few years ago as there was in 1960. Now it's down to 5 times as much crime as there was in 1960. Now that's not what I regard as a great trend, unless it continues a lot more sharply.
The liberals think we need more education and we need to help people in the inner city more to cut down crime there. Conservatives would say we have to be tougher on crime. Is either of them correct?
No. You see, the conservative view is really not a solution. It's a trade-off. It says, yes, it would be wonderful if we could do all these things to prevent crime in the first place. We just don't happen to be that smart. And so what we do, we put people behind bars who commit violent crimes.
Yeah.
Now, a few years ago, in Palo Alto, which is not far from Stanford University, a minority community, low income, they had the doubtful distinction of being the murder capital of the United States in proportion to their population. The next year, murder and all sorts of other violent crimes dropped tremendous amount, 30, 40, 50% in 1 year. Now, that wasn't because they discovered the root causes of crime or because they worked out everything that was wonderful. They launched a campaign that put a lot of the bad guys behind bars. And when they were behind bars,
so it's practical, basically, which is a trade-off.
Makes sense to me.
Being practical.
And the thing that even in a high crime area.
How can you? I'm this type of guy that it would say that I like the fact to be tough on crime. I have no sympathy for criminals, right? Criminals, they commit crime, they should be behind bars. Simple as that. No discussions, no nothing. We all have the willingness to make decisions in life. And I will be the one you throw the key, and that's it. I guess, I'm a little bit extreme into that area, but if you can meet me in the middle, I'm okay, right? But we have to be tough on crime. Criminals are not. Listen, for those people that live in the cities in the United States, we know how criminals are, and you have criminals and these people that are weird, and you have to choose which stand are you gonna have, right? In these situations, I think he make a good point. Putting people in behind bars is just a trade-off. It's not a program, right? We have constitutions, state and federal, and we have some laws in the state, just to make sure that we have a civil society. Man, if people cannot follow the civil society, okay, we have to pay. They have to pay. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comment section below.
Criminals. And so if you can just put your hands on those people who are raising all the hell in the community and take them out of circulation,
why not?
The crime rate drops.
People say there's undue emphasis on African Americans for committing crimes. Is that true? Ed Koch wrote a column here that the population is 25% African American in New York. 62% of the crimes are committed by African Americans.
I haven't checked these figures, but throughout the world, this is not
high, bro.
Throughout the world,
25%,
people are disproportionately represented in all kinds of different things. And it's true, obviously, in basketball. It's true in all kinds of other things.
Bro,
the main thing
is not going on there, man.
Is not to keep people out of jail because they're one race or another, because when you do that, the people who are going to suffer the most will be the black community.
Where are you on affirmative action?
Against.
Why?
Well, you can only do one of two things. You can either just judge people individually, or you can judge them by groups. This whole notion that you're going to come out with a compromise, I would defy anybody to come out with a compromise on that. You're going to do one of those two things. Now, you can pretend to be doing other things, but that's all you're going to do. Those are the only two choices you really have in the end. Again, the people who are the anointed think of this as a symbolic issue, and they want to be on the side of the angels. They don't ask, what are the consequences? Now, I've studied affirmative action programs around the world. One of the consequences is that those people who are more fortunate in the group that has the preferences, those people take the lion's share of the preferences. Very often, those at the other end of the scale, the poorer people, actually fall further behind. That's true of blacks here. It's true of Malays in Malaysia. It's true of various groups in India. And there are reasons for that. You know, you can say you must have certain proportions. Nothing is easier than for an employer who might otherwise locate.
Now, how can we fix that, right? How can we fix that? Is all these communities that are a little bit behind, how can we just minimize that without involving the government, right? What could be the solution? I guess there's a conversation I want to get into it when it comes to intelligence, right? I think certain cultural have certain intelligence that it could fit them very well, and I think in that case, we can figure out what kind of skill can be best for them to suit them in change of, you know, we can do incentive like money, right? But that has to be a company, right? That, let's say in Malaysia, the Malaysian community here, or wherever, Michigan, I don't know if that's the thing, but maybe they're not the most book driven, but maybe they're more construction driven. So maybe we should just focus in that area and just make sure that they exceed in what they're good at it.
Okay, let's say in the Bronx, to locate out in Provo, Utah.
And the Bronx is a project, bro.
Where he will be not near any black people, and therefore he will never have lawsuits, and the jobs will be in Provo, and people will wonder, why don't people, you know, here have more jobs? It never seems to occur to liberals that other people are not blocks of wood, that when you set up certain incentives, they will react to them in certain ways. And when they do that, the result may be the opposite of what you set out to do.
How do the anointed refer to people they don't agree with?
All sorts of ways, but I think the main thing is they believe that you're not merely in error, but in sin. In other words, they can't believe that you're just mistaken.
Okay.
You must have sold out. You must have warped about you.
You guys are for the rich. You guys only care about the rich guys. Answer that. How do you respond? Liberal says conservatives only care about rich people.
Well, one of the things I go into in the book is that the whole notion of rich is ridiculous. That most Americans don't stay in the same income bracket, even for 1 decade. So the same guy who is, quote, rich now was 20 years ago probably in the bottom 20%. I mean, I was on a cruise recently, a luxury cruise, and the guy said, you know, if someone had told me when I was growing up that I would end up on a cruise like this, I would have said, get real, man. You know, that
That's a good point.
Very few people are in that same income bracket the whole time.
I think the older you get, especially for males, your income increase. And I'm a good example of that. For the years, my income has increased slowly but steady, to a place where I can sustain my family, I can sustain myself very well. And it is true. You think that you're not going to be able to get to that bracket, but I think that 20% is always, you know, changing, right? It's changing and changing and changing. It's not always steady with the same people. Now you have the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. We get that. But those 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, they're in that category for a reason. And I don't know. I don't have nothing against that.
Right. The genuinely rich and the genuinely poor, I would estimate to be no more than 3% of the American people.
Really?
Put together.
Really? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Genuinely poor. Now, I'm seeing numbers like when they were talking about health care, they said, 30 million people couldn't afford it or something? That's
several million of those were making more than $50,000 a year. So it's not. See, this is one of the things the anointed do. They never believe that people make choices. There are people who have the money. They prefer to put that money into a BMW rather than into
a lot of young people didn't want health care.
That's a good point.
They were betting on their health.
Absolutely. And then this allows them to buy more stuff they want to buy. So it's not a question that they couldn't afford it. It's a question they don't choose to spend the money.
What about mean-spirited? Conservatives are mean-spirited. They're bigots. They don't like people.
Well, you know, one of the things I tell people say, you know, you're a very tough person. I'm not tough. Life is tough. I'm merely trying to acquaint you with those facts.
You know, back in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson announced a war on poverty. Am I wrong? But there are more poor people. I mean, in other words,
today than there were then, yes.
Yeah, there are more poor people.
Yes.
I mean, this was a hell of a war. We lost it, apparently, because for the last 30 years, we've been dumping money into these poverty programs.
Oh, absolutely.
Where's the money go?
Oh, it supports a whole industry of people who run those programs, who talk about those programs, research those programs, bureaucrats, and so on.
Doesn't help poor.
So instead of just helping the poor people, it's just the people that send the message are the one getting that money. Okay, that's a new angle. I was not thinking of that, but that makes sense. If you have people around the country giving these speeches about how we have to combat uh, poverty and what's the world of poverty, we have to keep giving more money away. That makes sense in a way, because if it is a government program, the cousin, or the cousin, or the cousin, or the brother, whatever, right? Family member, friends, and these funds can, deplete by the time it gets to the program itself. But that's a good point. That's a good point. If you know somebody, you have this budget, and you know this company, and you pay this company for, it gets very sketchy. That's a good point. I never thought about that.
Poor people.
No. The tragedy, you see, is that the anointed really want to make symbolic statements.
The anointed. That's funny.
And running these programs makes those symbolic statements. They don't really care if in the wake of affirmative action, for example, companies start locating away from minority communities so they don't even get involved in legal action. They don't care about that. They've made their statement on the side of the angels, and that's what's important.
Have you ever debated Jesse Jackson?
No, I haven't.
Is that because, would you like to, or would he not want to do that?
I have no idea.
You'd be willing to, I assume.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
You think that's too much showbiz?
It is. There are people who go and do this, and I'm doing less and less of it. And I tell them the story of an African boxing champion who fought an Irishman in St. Patrick's Day in Dublin. And he lost his title on what the sports writers called a questionable decision.
Yes.
And so you have to know what forum you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I saw Shelby Steele on with him, and I said,
point.
If Jesse Jackson and Shelby Steele each had to present a 2-hour lecture to an audience with an average IQ of 120, Shelby would wipe him out. But if they had 5 seconds each on Donahue, it would be Jesse Jackson all the way.
Right.
So everything depends upon the forum.
If the forum is a professional forum, I think that never happened. I haven't seen any video that represents such event happening. But if that was the case, it has to be a very well-formed formalities and structures where the crazy talk cannot just go by being checked. I think that's what he meant.
Jesse Jackson good for African Americans or not?
He's not. Good for himself.
Good for himself.
And that's true of most ethnic leaders in most groups, in most countries, in most periods of history.
Damn, man, that's crazy.
What will serve his interest is to keep people paranoid, dependent upon him, dependent upon government. What will serve their interest is typically just the opposite.
That's pretty interesting. So you're saying that the leaders, whatever group, leader, wants the people to be poor and dependent on them, as opposed to dependent on themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And you see this in the greatest cynicism in the academic world, where in many places, black organizations on campus have a say on who gets admitted. And they have turned down blacks with excellent credentials, both as students and as faculty members, for that very reason.
Who are the mascots of the anointed? You talk about the mascots of the anointed.
They're people whom they choose to back and whose rights are supposed to override other people's rights. The homeless are a classic example. I'm appalled when I see people out there in the street giving money to the home. I mean, able-bodied men. I think one of the classic pictures to me was in San Francisco when there was this able-bodied white man out in the street begging, and there's this black lady coming along there, very modestly dressed, like she didn't have, but she's stopping to open her purse to give him some money, And I thought, good heavens, have we really come to this? And we've been brainwashed by the anointed into thinking this is what we ought to do. What
do you say to guys who bum money off of you?
Not all of it can be repeated on the air, but the fact is they don't get any money.
They don't.
And people who complain now about all these people begging in the street, there's a simple answer. Don't give them money, and they won't be in the street.
When you wrote this...
Good point. Good point. Think about it. If you're a beggar and you're in the 42nd Street in Manhattan, you're making $150 a day. I mean, I think the average beggar will make $60,000 to $80,000. I don't know what's the number correctly, but it was ranging between that. It makes sense. I mean, you know how much street traffic you had through your. I mean, you know how many, maybe thousands and thousands of people just walking through your face every day. Of course, you're gonna get some change. I remember the J train going to Jamaica Center from Broadway Junction. There was this lady. She was like 75 years old, and she has a stitch that she was, I'm homeless. I'm making fun of her, but she would say, I'm homeless. She used to say, I'm homeless. I just need something to eat. Please help me. I'm homeless. She would just have the same pitch in every time that I would just hop in the train, and I would just ask myself like, okay, she got $1, but then you have to think like she might get another dollar in the next one, and then in the next one, the next one, next one, next one. You do that for 6 hours. You just need like 70 to 100 people just to give you a dollar or two. That's it. You get your 100, 150, or $125. You just made your day. It makes sense. If there's an incentive for them to be in the street, they're not gonna be in the street. And believe me, New York City, there are places for homeless people, man. There's free food. I mean, there's free shelter. There's a lot. There's shelters that look like hotels, man. It's crazy. I'm just wanted to throw that out there.
This. What were you trying to accomplish with the book, and did you do it? Were you nailing liberals for 30 years of social policy? What were you trying to say?
I was trying to reveal the thinking behind that, the kinds of assumptions, the kind of world that exists inside their mind, and therefore why those assumptions are so dangerous in the long run. It's not just the policies mentioned in that
They
book.
think they're better than everybody else.
Oh, absolutely.
Morally,
There's no question.
I think so.
And that's what makes them dangerous. Even all the policies that are mentioned there, 20 years from now, those policies may not be the policies we're concerned about.
Here.
But that mindset will still be there. And what makes them tremendously dangerous is that facts that contradict what they believe are simply ignored or evaded.
Where does the press fall into this as the anointed group? Are they part of the anointed?
Oh, absolutely. They're a major part of it, because one of the reasons that people don't get many of the facts that go against what's believed is that the press doesn't choose to publicize those facts.
Give me an example of something the press might not cover or cover well.
Oh, a few years ago, there was a story about prenatal care among blacks, that black women get less prenatal care than white women. The infant mortality rate is higher among blacks. They immediately assume that one causes the other. Now, one of the things I like to do is go back to the original source and find out what it said. I went back. On the very same page where it said that, the figures showed Mexican Americans get even less prenatal care than blacks, and they have a lower infant mortality rate than whites. So prenatal care and infant mortality rate have nothing to do with each other. If you break it down further, black women who have only a high school education, but who are married, their children have lower infant mortality rates than white women who have a college education, who are unwed mothers. So it's not race, it's not income, it's not education, it's lifestyle. When you live a certain way, there are consequences to that.
He knows his
the
stuff,
media
man.
doesn't want to accept that. Because if you say people's lifestyles have a lot to do with the outcome, then there's no room for the anointed.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah, I said it right. Wow, I mean, he just dropped so many bombs here that I'm trying to get it all together. It's like calling the Voldemort in Harry Potter. I think that's why he just shows that adjective to call liberals, right? The anointed. I think that it's fair to say that something happened during 1995 and 2022 where the message never got through, or the right side of things never stopped this thing from happening, or they were lazy, or they thought, you know what, this may never happen. There's a lot of ways where you can go with this. Now, my position on this, in my opinion, is it's a cultural thing, right? If you cannot, if you cannot tell the truth, or you can take some pieces of the puzzle where the truth might be vanished, something else will come in and just replace it. That's what it is. And I think that's what happened. Back then, 1995, I mean, probably 90% Christian nation, now going down to 60% nation or something like that. It makes sense. Something happened in the line where a lot of the cultures and values change, and this thing just went down to weird places based on what I'm watching lately. Let me know what you guys think. This is another great video from Thomas Sowell. What do you think? You guys agree with me? Am I missing something, or am I right in the majority of things in my opinions? Just let me know.